You've just entered Paranormal M, where the ordinary ends and the haunted begins. Each episode brings new chilling discoveries, pulled straight from the shadows. Subscribe and tap the bell to uncover what most people are too afraid to face. The Girl in the Black Dress. I still remember the first time I saw her. It was a Saturday morning. My sister, with whom I shared a room, was just kind of running around. I'd been sleeping until she woke me up. I remember hearing her footsteps and rolling over to watch her grab some toys, running back out of the door, the sun painting our room a golden yellow. A few more minutes, I thought to myself as I went to roll back over, and as I did, I saw her out of the corner of my eye, standing beside me, looking down at me. Though her face I couldn't quite make out, I saw that she was pale and had long black hair and a black dress with red. I remember sitting up and looking around thinking, who or what was that? On our second encounter, it was well past midnight. I remember laying in bed struggling to sleep. The light from the living room illuminated the foot of my bed. I remember laying on my side staring at the wall, trying my best to fall asleep. That's when I saw her again out of the corner of my eye. The same pale girl standing at the foot of my bed, blocking some of the soft light that trickled in this time. And I could see her well. Her long black hair, her pale face and dark eyes, her black dress with red detailing. Oddly enough, I didn't feel scared, and in fact the next thing I remember was being woken up by my grandparents for breakfast. My third time seeing her was almost a year later. Deep down, of course, I never forgot her. From my bed, I could see through our living room to the front door. It was late once more, another round of insomnia. Something I never quite grew out of. I saw her again standing in the doorway, which separated the kitchen and living room by the front door. She stood there looking through at me, and I felt like she knew I was looking back. She was the same as I always saw her pale face, black red dress, long black hair. But she looked, felt sad. One thing that had changed was she wasn't alone this time. She held the hand of a tall, dark shadow. I remember how inky black it looked. The only feature I was able to make out was a cowboy hat on its head. I fell asleep not too long after. I remember feeling sad. I remember feeling warm tears rolling down my face before finally falling asleep. The next morning, when our grandparents woke us up, our aunt was at her home and she asked us to sit down. Said that she had something to tell us. My brother and I looked at each other, and it was as if both of us had already knew what was coming. We asked if our father had passed away. I remember the shocked look on their faces and them asking how we knew. I couldn't tell you how my brother knew. Maybe he had felt that some sadness that night, and maybe he saw her as well. But for me, it was like she was an omen or a harbinger, maybe. Every time I saw her, something bad would happen. Fights, car accidents, death, and a shocking twist, my car malfunctioning or frying the computer. Also, funny enough, at midnight. Something happened when I was younger. So basically, when I was younger, 4 to 6, I used to sleep in with my parents and in the bed with them. One night I woke up and in my parents' bed with me was my grandparents. I thought it was weird since I was in my parents' bed and touched my granddad's back. He woke up and said something. I can't remember what exactly he said, but I think he said something to my nanny. My nanny said something back to him. I think she said that I was okay. Then I remember getting out of the bed and going downstairs for a drink. This was weird because even now I never go downstairs after I get into bed, and definitely don't do it when I was younger. When I got back upstairs, my nanny and granddad were gone. My mom and dad were now in the bed. I don't know what happened, and was just really curious to find out. This might be the wrong subreddit to post this, but oh well. And just to add, I also had asthma around this time. Also never brought this up to anyone. I don't feel safe in my house. Ever since my father died back in 2018, I've been feeling uneasy. I remember my first experience with the paranormal being maybe 2 years after my father's passing. I was in bed asleep and it was maybe 3 or 2 a.m., not quite sure. I woke up like I often did back then, so it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. So what I did was just listen to noises from outside because I couldn't fall back asleep. Then I started hearing what either sounded like footsteps or wood cracking from downstairs. The house I live in with my family was built in the 80s and has hardwood floor. Indeed. So those cracks are pretty common. This time, though, it sounded more like someone or something walking up the stairs. Quick context before I keep going. After my father's death, my mom always locked the door that led from the staircase to the floor where our bedrooms are. That's because she didn't feel as safe anymore, as she would put it. So I hear those noises stop, like right at the door. I thought to myself, okay, so this was probably just the wood. But then, and I shit you not. If you don't believe me, that's fine, but I know what I heard. I heard the sound of the doorknob being pressed down, like violent and shaking. Somehow, my brother and my mother didn't wake up from all that noise, and me, being a kid, just froze still and closed my eyes, hoping it would go away. When I woke up in the morning, I told my mom, and she said that the noise was probably just a letter being thrown in the mailbox. But at 2 a.m.? Over the next years, I get paranoid, and that's maybe the origin of some of the things I experienced. Some of the stuff I experienced was feeling something graze my shoulder, hearing a disembodied voice from downstairs while my mom was in the garden. My brother heard it too. The sudden feeling of being watched and footsteps when home alone. My dog just staring at random places with her ears pricked. Things disappearing and reappearing, and especially in places we didn't put them. Seeing stuff from the corner of the eye and sudden freezing winds in a room with a closed window in the summer. I have no idea what's happening, but I'm sick of it. Terrified to go anywhere in the house alone at this point. Everyone I tell, including my family, tells me it's because I watch too many horror videos. But I'm not crazy. I live in the far north of Scotland. This place almost feels cursed. For the past 2.5 years now, I've been living in the north of Scotland Highlands. When I say north, I mean as far north as you can possibly go. I live in a region called Caithness. It's in a small coastal town of Thurso, which is actually the northernmost town on the British mainland. I'd always wanted to live in the Scottish Highlands, which seemed a far cry from my gloomy hometown in Yorkshire, England. When my dad and his partner told me they bought an old house up here, I jumped at the opportunity. From what they told me, Caithness sounded like the perfect destination. There were seals and otters in the town's river, dolphins and orcas in the sea, and at certain times of the year, you could see the northern lights in the night sky. But despite my initial excitement of finally getting to live in the Scottish Highlands, full of beautiful mountains, amazing wildlife, and vibrant culture, I would soon learn the region I had just moved to was far from idyllic. So many tourists flood here each summer, but when you actually choose to live here, in a harsh and freezing coastal climate, this place feels more like purgatory. More than that, this place actually feels cursed. This probably just sounds like superstition on my part, but what almost convinces me of this belief more than anything else here is that disturbing things have washed up on the shore, each one supposedly worse than the last. and they all have to do with death. The first thing I discovered here happened maybe a couple of months after I moved to Caithness. My spare time I took to exploring the coastline around the Thurso area. It was on one of these days I started to explore what was east of Thurso. On the right-hand side of the mouth of the river, there's an old ruin of a castle. But past that leads to a cliff trail around the eastern coastline. I first started exploring this trail with my dog, Maisie. It was on a windy, rainy day. So we trekked down the cliff trail and onto the bedrocks by the sea, making our way around the curve of the cliff base, and we found something. Littered all over the bedrock floor were what seemed like dozens of dead seabirds. They were everywhere. It was as though they'd just fallen out of the sky and washed ashore. I just assumed that they either crashed into the rocks or were swept into the sea due to the stormy weather. Feeling like this was almost a warning, I decided to make my way back home, rather than risking being blown off the cliff trail. It wasn't until a day or so after, when I went back there to explore further down the coast, that a woman with a young daughter stopped me. Shouting across the other side of the road through the heavy rain, the woman told me that she had come from that direction, but that there was a warning sign for dog walkers, warning them the area was infested with dead seabirds that had died from bird flu. She said the warning had told dog walkers to keep their dogs on a leash at all times. Bird flu was contagious to them. This instantly concerned me, as the day before my dog Maisie had gotten close to death seabirds to sniff them. There was something else, something about meeting this woman had kind of struck me as being weird. Although she was just a normal woman with her young daughter, they were walking a dog that was completely identical to Maisie, a small black and white border collie. Maybe that's why the woman was so adamant to warn me, because in my dog she saw her own, heading in the direction of danger. But why this detail was so weird to me was because it felt almost like an omen of some kind. She was leading with her dog, identical to mine, away from the contagious dead birds, as though I should have been doing the same. It almost felt as though it wasn't just the woman who was warning me, but something else. Something disguised as a coincidence. Curious as to what this warning sign was, I thanked the woman for letting me know before continuing with Maisie toward the trail. We reached the entrance of the castle ruins, and on the entrance gate I saw the sign that she had warned me about. The sign was bright yellow and outlined with contagion symbols. If the woman's warning wasn't enough to make me turn around, this sign definitely was. So I head back into town, all the while worrying that my dog might now be contagious. Thankfully, Maisie would be absolutely fine. Although, I would later learn that bird flu is common in the region, and so dead seabirds wasn't anything new. What I would stumble upon a year later, washed up in the town's beach, it would be far more sinister. In the summer the following year, like most days, I walked with Maisie along the town's beach, stretched from one end of the Thurso Bay to the other. Never really liked this beach because it was always covered in stacks of seaweed, but not only did it stink of sulfur, but it attracted swarms of flies and midges. Even if they weren't on you, you couldn't help but feel like you were being bitten all over your body. One thing I did love about this beach was that on a clear enough day you could see in the distance one of the islands of Orkney. On a more cloudy or foggy day, it was as if this particular island was never there to begin with, and all you see instead is the ocean and a false horizon. On one particular summer's day, I'm walking with Maisie along the beach. I'd let her off her lead as she loved exploring and finding new smells from the ocean. She was rummaging through the stacks of seaweed, and suddenly, Maisie had found something. I went to see what it was, and I realized it was something I'd never seen before. What we found lying on the top layer of seaweed was an animal skeleton. Wasn't sure what animal it belonged to exactly, but it was either a sheep or a goat, and there were many farms in Caithness and across the sea in Orkney. My best guess was that an animal on one of Orkney's coastal farms must have fallen off a ledge or cliff, drowned, and was kind of just its remains washing up here. Although I was initially taken back by the skeleton, grinning up at me with its molar-like teeth, something about this animal quickly caught my eye. The upper body was indeed skeletal remains, completely picked white clean, but the lower body was all still there, still had its hooves and all its wet fur. The fur was dark gray, and as far as I could see, all meat underneath was still intact. Although disturbed by this carcass, I was also very confused. What I didn't understand was why had the upper body of this animal been completely picked off, whereas the lower part hadn't even been touched. What was weirder is the lower body hadn't even decomposed yet, still looked fresh. And I can still recollect the image of this dead animal in my mind's eye, and at the time, one of my first impressions I had of it was that it seemed almost satanic. It reminded me of the image of Baphomet, a goat's head on a man's body. What made me think this was not only the dark goat-like legs, but also the position the carcass was in. Although the carcass belonged to a goat or a sheep, the way the skeleton was positioned almost made it appear hominid. The skeleton was laid on its back with arm and leg on each side of its body. However, what I also have to mention about this incident is that, like the dead seabirds and the warnings of the concerned woman, this skeleton also felt like an omen. A bad omen. Thought it might have been at the time, and tell you the truth, it was. Not long after finding the skeleton washed up on the town's beach, my personal life suddenly takes a very dark and somewhat tragic downward spiral. I almost wish I could go into details of what happened. It would only support the idea of how much of a bad omen the skeleton would turn out to be. But it's rather personal. While I'll still live in this godforsaken place, come across one more thing that's washed ashore. And although I can't say whether it was more or less disturbing than the Baphomet-like skeleton I'd found, it was definitely bone-chilling. 6 or so months later, and into the Christmas season, I was still recovering from what personal thing had happened to me, almost foreshadowed by the Baphomet skeleton. It was also around this time that I'd gotten out of a long-distance relationship. I was only now finding closure. Feeling as though I'd finally kind of gotten over it, I decided I wanted to go on a long hike by myself along the cliff trail east of Thurso. And so, the day after Christmas, Boxing Day, got my backpack together, packed a lunch for myself, and headed out at 6 a.m. The hike along the trail had taken me all day, and by the evening I'd walked so far I actually discovered what I first thought was a ghost town. What I found was an abandoned port settlement, which had the creepiest looking, disperse of old stone houses, as well as what looked like the ruins of an ancient round tower. As it turned out, this was actually the Castleton Heritage Center, a tourist spot. It seemed I had walked so far around the rugged terrain that I was now 10 miles outside of Thurso on the other side of the settlement with the distant cliffs of Dunnet Bay, which, compared to the cliffs I'd already trekked along, were far grander. Though I could feel my legs finally begin to give way, I kind of already was anticipating a long journey back along the trail, and I decided I was going to cross the bay and reach the cliffs. Then we kind of just make my way back home after. Considering what I would find there, this is the point in the journey where I should have stopped. By the time I'm making my way around the bay, it had become very dark. I'd already walked past more than half the bay, but the cliffs didn't feel any closer. It was at this point when I decided I really needed to turn around, and at night, walking back along the cliff trail was gonna be dangerous, and the parts of the trail that led down to the base of the cliff really couldn't afford the tide to really cut off my route. I made my way back through the abandoned settlement of the Heritage Center, and at night, this settlement definitely felt more like a ghost town. Shining my phone flashlight in the windows of the old stone houses, I was expecting to see a face or something peer out at me. What surprisingly made these houses scarier at night was a handful of old fishing boats that had been left outside of them. The wood they were made from looked very old, and the paint had almost been weathered off. But what was more concerning was that in this abandoned ghost town of a settlement, I wasn't alone. The van had pulled up with 3 or 4 young men getting out. Wasn't sure what they were doing exactly, but they were burning things into a trash can. And what it was they were burning, I didn't know, but as I made my way out of the abandoned settlement, every time I looked back at the men by the van, at least one of them were watching me. The abandoned settlement. The creepy men just burning things by their van. That wasn't even the creepiest thing I came across on that hike. The creepiest thing I found actually came as soon as I decided to head back home, before I was even back at the Heritage Center. Finally making my way back, I tried retracing my own footprints along the beach. It was so dark by now that I needed to use my phone flashlight to find them. As I wandered through the darkness with only the dim brightness of the flashlight to guide me, I came across something. Ahead of me, I could see a dark silhouette of something in the sand. It was too far away for my flashlight to reach. It seemed to me that it was just a big rock, so I wasn't all too concerned. But for some reason, I wasn't 100% convinced either. The closer I get to it, the more I think it could possibly be something else. I was right on top of it now. The silhouette didn't look much like a rock as I thought it did. If anything, it looked more like a very big fish, almost like a tuna fish. Didn't even realize fish could get that big and around these waters. Still unsure whether this was just a rock or a dead fish of sorts, but too afraid to shine my light on it, I decided I was going to touch it with my foot. My first thought was that I was going to feel like a hard rock beneath me, only to realize the darkness had played a trick on me. I lift up my foot and I press it on the dark silhouette, but what I felt wasn't hard rock, it was squishy. My first reaction was a little bit of shock. If this wasn't a rock like I originally thought, then it was something else, and had probably once been alive. Almost afraid to shine my light on whatever this was, I finally work up the courage to do it. Hoping this really is just a very big fish, I reluctantly shine my light on the dark, squidgy thing, but what the light reveals is something else. It was a seal, a dead seal pup. Seal carcasses do occasionally wash up in this region. Wasn't even the first time I saw one, but as I studied this dead seal with my flashlight, feeling my own skin crawl as I did it, I suddenly noticed something alarming. This seal pup had a chunk of flesh bitten out of it. For all I knew, this poor seal pup could have been hit by a boat, and that's what caused the wound. But the wound was round and basically a perfect bite shape. Depending on the time of year, there are orcas around these waters, which obviously hunt seals. But this bite was no bigger than what a fully grown seal could make. Did another seal do this? I know other animals will sometimes eat their young, but I never heard of seals doing this. But what was even worse than the idea that this pup was potentially killed by its own species was that this poor little seal pup, was missing its skull. Not its head, its skull. The skin was all still there, but it was empty, lying flat down against the sand. And just when I think it can't get any worse than this, I leave the seal to continue making my way back. That's when I come across another dark silhouette in the sand ahead. And I go toward it, and what I find, another dead seal pup. But once more, this one also had an identical wound. A fatal bite mark, and just like the other one, the skull was missing. I could accept that they'd been killed by either a boat or, more likely from the evidence, an attack from another animal, but how did both of these seals with the exact same wounds in the exact same space, have both their skulls missing? I didn't understand it at all, and these seals hadn't been ripped apart either. They only had one bite mark each. Would the seal or seals that killed them really remove their skulls? I didn't know. I still don't. But what I do know is that both of these carcasses were identical, completely identical, which was strange. They clearly died the same way, and more than likely knew how they died. But what happened to their skulls? As it happens, it's actually common for seal carcasses to be found headless, apparently. They'd been tumbling around in the turf for a while. The head can detach from the body before washing ashore. And the only other answer I could find was scavengers. Something other, like animals will scavenge the body and remove the head. What other animals that was, I wasn't really sure. But at least now I had more than one explanation as to why these seal pups are missing their skulls, even if I didn't know which answer that was. Although I now had reasoned out the cause of these missing skulls, it still struck me as weird as to how these skull pups were seal pups, were almost identical to each other in their demise. Maybe one of them could lose their skulls, but could they really both do that? I mean, I suppose so. Unlike the other things I found washed ashore, these dead seals thankfully didn't feel much of an omen, more like a common occurrence to the region. But growing up most of my life in Yorkshire, England, where nothing ever happens, and suddenly moving to what seemed like the edge of the world and finding mutilated remains of animals, it definitely stays with you. For the past 2.5 years that I've been here, I almost do feel as though this region is cursed. Not only because I found things washed ashore, and after all, dead things wash up here all the time, I almost feel like this place is cursed for a number of reasons. Despite the natural beauty all around, this place does somewhat feel like a purgatory. A depressive place that attracts lost souls from all around the UK. Many of the locals leave this place, migrating far down south to places like Glasgow. On the contrary, it seems a fair number of people like me have come from afar to live here. Mostly retired English couples who, for some reason, choose this place above all others to live comfortably before the day they die. Perhaps, like me, they thought this place would be idyllic, only to find out that they were wrong. The rest of the population are either junkies or convicted criminals relocated here from all around the country. And if anything, you could even say that Caithness is the UK's Alaska, where people come to get far away from their past. Maybe even themselves. But instead, amongst the natural beauty, are harassed by a cold, dark, depressing climate. Maybe this place isn't actually cursed, and maybe it's really just a remote area in the far north of Scotland that has, for UK standards, a very unforgiving climate. Regardless, I won't be here for much longer. Maybe the ghost that followed me here will follow me wherever I may end up next. And a fair bit of warning. If you do choose to come here, make sure you only come in the summer. But whatever you do, if you have your own personal demons of any kind, whatever you do, just don't move here. I don't know where they're really from, but perfectly circular bite marks. I think they call those cookie cutter sharks, right? I don't know, I'm reaching back pretty far. Encarta far. Shout out to anybody that remembers Encarta. UFOs in Yorkshire, England. My true childhood paranormal experience. Ever since I was a very young lad, I always pondered the existence of extraterrestrials. Perhaps like all of us from a certain age. But for me, growing up in the northeast of England, no older than 10, the existence of aliens, or UFOs for that matter, it was as mysterious and uncertain as the existence of God himself. Even the existence of other things like vampires or werewolves or Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, Nessie as we Brits like to call her, was either as likely or unlikely to exist. As that young blonde-haired boy with pointy ears, the only aliens I knew of were from the movies I watched. Whether it was War of the Worlds or Independence Day, these movies could only imagine the possibility of alien life and the consequences of that, without providing the real thing. But by the end of 2012, and barely into secondary school, it would seem I may finally have my answer, whether I really accepted it or not. I've recently shared both. Yep, both of my childhood UFO experiences before, but being a writer by trade, I thought I'd use my craft to revisit them, in the hope of fleshing out as much of these two mysteries as possible, so I could decisively decide if what I saw as a boy was indeed real or not. For the reader, it'll also be up to you to decide if the events I witnessed happened as I saw them, or maybe my childhood imagination got the better of me, or if I'm really just full of it. Not that it's really worth much of a damn without any evidence, but the following of what I'm about to tell you did in fact happen, and as I saw it, and to the best of my recollection. By the year 2012, I'd been growing up in the East Riding of Yorkshire for the past 7 years. In the average-sized but oddly named port town of Goole. This town was no particular interest, really, except perhaps for its two landmarks, two rather tall water towers, humorously named the Salt and Pepper Pots. Settled beside a tributary river, Goole was sparsely surrounded by patches of farmland and large crop fields. Perhaps the perfect setting for a UFO story. Like the crop circle stories I knew in the United States, my first UFO experience wouldn't happen in some field on the outskirts of town, but in the town itself. More precisely, it would happen no more than 100 meters outside of my bedroom window. Unfortunately, I don't remember the precise year this event took place, although I do know it happened in either 2011 or 2012. Therefore, it was either in my final year of primary school or my nerve-wracking first year of secondary. Regardless, I would have been around 11 years old. As a child, and even through my teens, I was always a bad sleeper, either getting no sleep at all or waking up in the very early hours of the morning. And it was on one of these early mornings that I woke up to my silent, pitch-black bedroom. Everyone else in my house fast asleep. Not having an alarm clock or a phone to tell the time, I wondered what time of night it was. I perhaps know how much sleep I could get. As I said, this was all a regular occurrence for me, as was peeking my head through the curtain next to my bedside to see if the sky was still dark. But looking out my bedroom window, I would have seen my 20-meter-long garden which I regularly played football on, as well as the neighbor's house on the other side of the back garden fence. But what I saw then, in a short distance over the road of this particular neighboring house, would be a complete first. What I saw, flying or gliding or simply just moving, about 100 meters or less away from my bedroom window, was what I can only describe as a flying saucer-shaped-like object. In the past, I described this object as the most stereotypical flying saucer shape you could ever see or imagine. The night was too dark to see its color. I remember it making a distinctive humming noise as it moved over the town beneath it. But how I knew this object was saucer-shaped was because of, really, as it moved, it indeed hummed. A single row of small bright lights moved around and around. At that age, if I imagined a flying saucer, I would have pictured a particularly large craft. But this object seemed no larger than a car or maybe a small van. The speed at which this thing moved was not particularly fast or slow, but fast enough so that, I was seeing it was gone in the next 5 to 10 seconds. Not knowing if what I'd just seen was in fact real or just a dream, I pinched and slapped myself hard enough to wake up almost anyone. But I was awake, and as you can imagine, I was in disbelief. If any one thing, paranormal or otherwise, that you didn't already know or believe in just appeared to you, confirming absolute proof whether it was God or Jesus Christ, a heaven or hell, even ghosts, and yes, aliens, I think anybody would have had the very same first reaction. This can't be real. I must be dreaming. Do I need to question the meaning of my own understanding of life? That was the reaction that I remember having. Irrational in the face of the unbelievable. And if you were to ask me what I did next, having witnessed such an extraordinary and incomprehensible sight, you'd be surprised to learn that what I did was simply lay back down on my pillow and eventually fall back to sleep. You'd probably be surprised, but that's what I did. The very next day, with the event of last night still fresh in my mind, I found my mom putting laundry away. It was in my dad's bedroom. Feeling comfortable enough to tell my mom almost anything, even which girls at school I fancied, I told her exactly what I saw the night before. And like any parent would, having been told a fictitious-sounding story by their young child, my mom showed no indication of surprise or even shock, instead responding with the lines of, "Oh wow, oh really?" as she carried on folding the laundry on the bed. I asked her if she believed me. She said she did, but even before I confessed to her what I saw, I knew she wouldn't. Maybe I just needed to get what I saw that night instantly off my chest. Tell my mom would maybe be the best way to do it, without facing ridicule from my friends, or being laughed at by my sister, or simply just ignored by my dad. As unbelievable as the story that I told my mom was, I knew what I saw that night was real. I think most people on this planet know when they're dreaming and when they're not. I just knew I wasn't. If this was the case, then what I saw from my bedroom window that night was indeed a flying saucer, a UFO. It may then come as a surprise that whomever is reading this, as it did for me, to learn that despite bearing witness to what appeared to be an unforgettable UFO experience, I'd almost forgotten completely about what happened that night, not fully recollecting what I saw until the latter part of the last year. Was I in denial at what I saw, and did my mind just choose to repress the memory of it? When I first wrote of this experience only recently, an online user speculated as much to me that my young brain couldn't comprehend what I'd seen, therefore repressed the whole experience. But like I already said, this would not be my only potential UFO encounter, and the next time, thankfully, I wouldn't be alone. During the summer of 2012, and having just graduated primary school, my 6 friends and I ventured almost every day to the exact same place along the outskirts of town. We had found a field with a small adjoining wooded area, and very quickly, this area became our brand new den, which we spent most days climbing trees or playing tag hide and seek. At the very end of our den was a 4-foot wide creek, separating the field that we played in from the town's rugby club that was also on the outskirts of town. The reason I bring up this creek is, because my friends and I, upon discovering it, would also spend a lot of our time there that summer. We enjoyed playing this juvenile game where one of us had to leap over the embankment on the other side, or cross via a narrow wooded plank that we made to make a bridge. Being the attention seeker I was at that age, I was always willing to jump up and over the other side, and in fact, I was the best. Anybody else who tried mostly ended up with 1 foot in a less than sanitary piece of water. Several months later, nearly halfway through our first year of secondary school, our tradition of jumping creeks and field hide and seek had sadly become far less frequent with the ongoing school year. That was until one afternoon, or maybe it was evening, I don't remember. My friends and I ventured back to our den and the nearby creek, crossing over and entering behind the grounds of the rugby club. These grounds consisted of 2 large rugby fields and a smaller patch of grass by the side. That's where this creek had led us. What the 5 or 6 of us were doing there, I'm not sure. We did sometimes use the grounds to play tag, hide and seek, and other times we just explored. But what I remembered next from that afternoon and evening, in whichever autumn month it was, we caught sight of something flying in the not-too-distant sky, heading directly our way. At first, we must have thought it was nothing more than an airplane or Royal Air Force craft, as our town had them passing the sky on a regular basis. The closer this thing got, the more it started to look like something else, something none of us had probably ever seen before. Started to look like what our juvenile imaginative minds could only interpret as an alien spacecraft of some kind. So much so that one of my friends said something in the lines of, "Is that a UFO?" as though speaking the minds of all of us. Whatever this thing was, it was still coming our way and flying curiously low. As close as it was now, I think that we were all waiting for this craft to visually kind of clarify for us to get some kind of a plane in sight. But what I can still remember vividly is this thing being directly over our heads. My next thought while looking up to it was, that is a UFO, an alien spaceship. Before any other thought could enter my mind, whether it be one of awe, dread, or panic, I hear one of my friends a meter or two behind me shout, "Shit!" And by the time I look behind me, all I see is every one of my friends running away toward the embankment of the creek. It was as though they were running for their lives, and if I recall, it was just me and my friend George who really didn't. I'm sure I thought of running too, but I must have been in such awe or disbelief of what I was seeing, and even if I did run, I thought it was sure to abduct me. Whether I ran or stood right where I was, I felt convinced there was nothing I could really do. If it was going to take me, I guess it would. When I turn away from my friends to look back up at what I see to be an alien craft, what I instead see is some kind of low-flying military jet was turned slightly away from us now and flying off. My friends also must have noticed it was just a military jet as they'd stopped running and now joined slowly back with the rest of the group, realizing there was nothing really to be afraid of anymore. Although my memory of the following conversation is a bit hazy, we did discuss what we had just seen, with every one of us indeed thinking it was a UFO at first, only to then realize that it was a military jet. I don't remember the conversation going on further from there, or what we even did afterwards for that matter. Probably just went back into town and played football at the park. However, something I discreetly remember to this day is that in the next 2 years I still knew them, before packing up my things and moving abroad with my family. It's that not a single one of us ever talked about the experience again, not even for a laugh. There was no, "Remember when we all thought we saw a UFO, but it was really just a plane?" I did drift away from most of these friends by the following year, as we were all in separate classes in school and played for rival football teams. So perhaps they did talk about the experience, except, without me there. In my last year before moving abroad, I did reacquaint myself with my best friend Kai. They were there that day at the rugby club. We had drama class together that year. It was in these lessons that we learned all about these terrifying urban legends, in which the class afterwards had to dramatically perform them. It was also from these lessons that Kai and myself became obsessed with urban legends, so much so that we would watch scary YouTube videos about them. But in that same year, enjoying to be scared together, not once to my recollection did either of us ever bring up that experience at the rugby club. Not once. Guy was one of my friends I saw run away that day, so he obviously scared by the craft as well, but never really brought it up either, and in fact, I think I almost forgot about the experience altogether, just like my first experience a year prior. But what's even crazier to me is that I seem to forget about both of these experiences, regardless of what they were, at least for the next 10 years. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about this second experience, even though it only turned out to be a military jet, it's because since recollecting my first experience recently and becoming acquainted with UFO lore and history, some things about that day at the rugby club just don't seem to add up to me. Number one, if this was an RAF jet, then it was flying dangerously low, potentially 160 feet above us. From what I researched, RAF jets can fly as low as 100 feet, but when it comes to populated areas containing vehicles and civilians, they can go no lower than 500 feet. If this was a jet, it may not have even seen my friends and I, but it was still flying in and around a populated town. Number two, I was 100% convinced that this craft flying over me was an alien craft, 100 feet or so above me, and that's what I believed I was seeing. It was only when I looked at my friends running away and then back again that it was somehow now a military jet. Number three, a And perhaps the most confusing aspect of this experience is that the RAF jet, from my recollection, made barely any noise. From what I've read, RAF jets at only 25 meters after takeoff are so loud it can rupture your eardrums. Like I said, this jet was no more than 160 feet above us, yet I could still hear my friend cuss the S-word behind me. Having recently fallen down the UFO rabbit hole the past year, I did come across one video, whether real or a hoax, of a sort of spinning, bright glowing light in the clear day sky. It slowly morphed into a standard airliner, although in the video this transition took the better part of a minute. I then wondered if the craft I saw that day could possibly have done the same thing. However, when I previously shared my experiences online only several months ago, one person rationally suggested that the craft I saw could have in fact been the Avro Vulcan XH558, which was active in 2012 and based at Doncaster Sheffield Airport, not that far from Goole. The Avro Vulcan is indeed a very odd-looking military craft. It has wings resembling something like you would see at a Star Trek. Maybe that's why it's called the Avro Vulcan. From what I remember, in the few seconds that I fully believed this thing flying over me to be a UFO, it didn't strike me as flying saucer-shaped, not like the one I'd seen a year before. Regardless, whatever this craft was, it definitely struck me as alien at first. Maybe what I thought I was seeing was a different kind of alien craft, or maybe it was really just a military jet, an oddly shaped one at that. If you were to ask me now, in the year 2024, if what I saw in 2012 was either a UFO or simply an RAF jet, for the sake of rationality, I would say it was a jet, whose strange appearance merely confused a group of 12-year-old boys. However, to conclude the speculation of the second experience, I'll leave you with this. Not long after posting of my experiences, an online user advised me to share my story with a specific UFO investigator, who particularly focuses on UFO activity in the Yorkshire area. Feeling in need of answers, I emailed this very same investigator. He was intrigued by my story. He requested a conversation over the phone with me. And after relaying the second experience with him, highlighting how this jet was supposedly flying dangerously low without producing much sound at all, he simply said to me, that wasn't a military craft. If you were also to ask me whether I believe in aliens, I would say that I do. Not because of what I saw. I still don't know if what I saw was real. I do believe in aliens or whatever they are. There's countless theories. Simply because since I first fell down this UFO rabbit hole learning of the experiences of many others, the existence of extraterrestrials no longer appears irrational to me. After all, we can literally be the only intelligent beings and really to exist here. I don't know. The answer is, I just don't know. But what I do know is that for me, like it'll be for countless others, the truth is still out there somewhere, maybe even right here on our very own planet. Something strange happened last night. So I've told you about my friend Wyatt and the ghost thing that I met as a child. I've been dealing with this thing, or I've been experiencing the paranormal since then. I've seen and dealt with an awesome amount of spirits. Last night was no exception. For background, I feel I must tell you that my brother-in-law got my husband and I at night at one of the hotels he works at. Now this hotel, it had been in operation since the late 1800s. It's had a very varied history. It was a family home and hotel, and it's now a hotel and pub. So we got there last night and we had a drink. Not a big deal, I don't drink often or very much. It does help that my mother-in-law is a recovering alcoholic and that we're currently staying with her, but back to the night though. I usually don't stay up late, and last night was really not much of an exception. My husband and I were in bed going to sleep when I suddenly felt wide awake. My brain refused to shut off. feel as though I should mention that my husband needs the TV on to be, in order for him to go to sleep. And as of late last night, we've been together for 7.5 years. So I'm quite used to this and fall asleep quickly. But last night I couldn't. I felt like I needed to get up and check on everyone else in the hotel. There was only one other couple there, so this feeling of needing to get up and check every room seemed kind of odd. That's not the weirdest part, though. I kept waking up at random times through the night, and this male presence telling me that he needed something from me, or that he needed my help. I kept feeling like I was needed. And every time I was wide awake, this odd thing would happen because usually it's easier energy to do basically everything. So the energy that I felt was off. I shouldn't have been there, so in that moment I know whoever he was there. I could feel him in the room with us. Wide awake at 5:30, and if you know me, you would know that's not normal. I usually don't wake up that early. It's exactly what time it is over here. Strange things are happening again. My mother-in-law and husband both work, and I'm almost always home alone, except for on Sundays and Mondays. Sure, I hear sounds that shouldn't be all the time when I'm home alone. However, it's the things that happen when we're all home that don't make much sense. I'm not sure if I mentioned it on this subreddit or on another one, but I do have ghosts that I know of in my home. They don't bother us, and me, that much. My mother-in-law, however, seems to be fair game. She's seen shadows of pets we don't have, and, for example, we have 2 small dogs. We're constantly asking each other where the dogs are because we'll, see these small shadows moving along the floor. They're either going toward the bedrooms or the front door. However, both our dogs will be asleep next to one of us, and they also seem to be somebody who likes moving things around or making them seemingly disappear. The best example of this would be the toothbrush cap in my mother-in-law's toothbrush going missing, then reappearing 3 days later. My mother-in-law was done brushing her teeth. When she reached over to put the cap back on her toothbrush, it wasn't there. We'd looked for it, but couldn't find it. Sunday, when she went to brush her teeth, it was back in her toothbrush. We have no idea where it came from or how it got back on her brush. Just been small things like that. PS4 controller, my headphones, small things. It's happened before, but it's getting worse. My friend Wyatt. I was 5 or 6 at the time. My family lived in North Carolina. I don't remember where exactly at this point because we moved a lot. However, my aunt and uncle lived by a rodeo that my uncle helped with. And every Thursday we would go down there to go to the rodeo. Their house and the rodeo were surrounded by woods. My brothers and my cousin and I would run in and pretty much go there all the time. Now, what you need to understand is that at this time, I was the youngest, and the annoying little sister and cousin, so I was always being left behind. My cousin had decided on this day that it would be fun to lead us into the woods and then lose me along the way, which, to be honest, wasn't that hard to do. I've never really been afraid of the dark or these woods, so I would lag, and that we usually didn't go too far in either. This time, my cousin led us further than we had ever been. My brothers and she had turned around at some point and left me there, as per their plan. I was lost and tired and getting a little bit scared. There was a storm coming, you could smell it. I was getting frantic. Eventually came upon an old shack, which isn't all that strange in North Carolina. Anyway, I went into the shack as the rain started to come down. I must tell you, I'm highly terrified of thunder and lightning. And that in my mind, the storm lasted a lot longer than in actuality. Anyway, I huddled into the shack terrified. And suddenly, I hear in a very thick southern drawl a male voice asking me if I was okay and where my family was. Now, I hadn't heard anyone out in the woods or seen anyone as I come into the shack. However, when I lifted my tear-stained face, I saw what I can now describe as a Confederate soldier standing in the doorway of the shack. I wasn't afraid of him, as I probably should have been. There was something comforting about him. I told him that my brother and my cousin had disappeared. I didn't know how to get back to my aunt and uncle's place. He nodded and said he would stay with me until the storm gave up a little bit, and he would try to help me find my way home. Now again, to a little girl of 5, the storm seemed to go on forever. Sat there just talking to this person, and he told me that his name was Wyatt. The storm started to let up. The soldier led me to the edge of the woods, right by my uncle's house. My mom, aunt, and uncle and grandma were screaming my name. I could hear them as they came to the edge, so I screamed, "I'm here!" They all came running over to me as we walked to the edge, and they all started yelling at me, telling me not to follow my brothers and cousin into the woods anymore. It wasn't safe. Told them that I would be all right, and this nice man helped me out of the woods. They all looked at me dumbfounded. There was nobody with me. I turned to look at the man, but he was gone. Now, this couldn't have taken more than a few seconds, and I'd just seen him in the corner of my eyes. I'd turned. He had been waving at me, but there was nobody there. They'd told me to stop making up stories and stop lying to them. And to this day, most of them still don't believe me. My mom tells me I must have made up a savior for myself. But looking back on it now, I know that he was there and that I had seen a ghost. Wyatt, or whatever his name may have, seemed to follow me, and I still, to this day, will see a Confederate soldier out of the corner of my eye. It may just be my mind trying to figure out who or what I saw that day over the 2.5 decades ago, but Wyatt will always be a memory that I hold dear. So I've had many people comment about Wyatt, and they all wondered about him, and so let me explain. Wyatt is the first spirit that I actually interacted with. He saved me when I was literally lost in the woods. I mean, I was 5 then, and now I'm almost 37. And he's still here. Wyatt has been with me for as long as I can remember. He's been with me through some very bad times and cheered me on through the good. As I'd gone through life, he's been my biggest constant. My family hasn't been nearly as supportive of me as Wyatt has. I still see him in a Confederate uniform, which hasn't changed in the least. I've learned a few new things about him very recently. First, he had 2 brothers and they're triplets. Let me explain. I recently moved to the Washington coast, not too far from Astoria. Before you ask, yes, Wyatt came with me. As with a lot of port cities, Astoria has an underground where a lot of shady things went down, including Shanghaiing, including Shanghaiing. Why don't I know what that is? I feel like I should. And this is important to the story, apparently. Shanghaiing. Brain fart. Wyatt, as I had stated, is a Confederate soldier. His 2 brothers were Union soldiers, which wasn't uncommon back then. And as Wyatt told me, his brothers ran away to join the Union. Wyatt, unfortunately, got caught by their father, who forced him to join the Confederacy. As you may have guessed, Wyatt didn't like that and went AWOL. He went in search of his brothers, and if you live anywhere near North Carolina in the area, you know that winters there can get very bad. As Wyatt tells it, he got caught in a snowstorm, turned around. Eventually, he froze to death without anybody knowing where he was. Only one brother survived the war. His name is Thomas. Yes, I said is. Haven't been completely into the underground, but some parts have been turned into little shop areas. I was down at one such place. My husband was talking to an artist who had a shop down there. That's when I saw him. His hat was low to cover his face. There was this angry energy coming off of him. I asked him what the problem was, and he pointed past me to the ever-present Wyatt. I wasn't aware that anybody knew Wyatt. He really hadn't run into anybody who really did, and I looked at this new spirit confused. That was when he took off his hat and I saw the spitting image of the spirit that had been with me since I was 5. I looked back and forth between him and Wyatt, then glared at Wyatt. The hell? Wyatt sighed, but the new spirit spoke. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, "but I've been looking for this idiot through hell and high water for years, and I suddenly find him here. Let's just say that I was happy he wasn't mad at me." Wyatt was gaping like a fish. "You looked for me?" I was confused, and in the middle I had to ask, "What the hell is going on here?" Thankfully, this new spirit was more forthcoming with information about their past than Wyatt had ever been. I think Wyatt thought that his family didn't love him anymore, so running into this spirit was a bit of a shock. The new spirit told me the story after introducing himself first as Thomas. Thomas had watched his other brother, who I now know is named Daniel, whole other post, watched him die in the battlefield. When he got home, his father informed him that Wyatt had gone AWOL, that nobody had ever found him. Thomas knew that his brother was out there somewhere and started looking for him. The brothers had always talked about coming out west to make names for themselves away from their father and his influence. So naturally, Thomas thought that that was what Wyatt had done. So he came out here to look for his brother. He heard about men being taken from bars and what have you, forced to work on ships. Naturally, Thomas thought that his brother could have been one of them. So he set out to get himself shanghaied. Unfortunately, word had gotten out that Thomas wanted to get caught. So when they caught him, instead of enslaving him, they killed him. So naturally, he started following me too. He and Wyatt fight constantly. And yes, I've tried to get Wyatt and Thomas to move on, and they refuse, and they have to find their brother. Can't say I blame them. Now I have 2 of 3. Thankfully, I kind of tune Wyatt and Thomas out most times, hoping that we'll eventually find Daniel and they can all move on, but for now, I'll just settle for knowing that some strange, sort of strings of events have brought me to do with these 2 lost brothers, and, well, we will do everything to keep me and mine safe. If that's true, that is. Well, I would find the 3rd one is all I'm saying. My Ghost Stories. The Scary Green House in Vail, Oregon. My name is Lee, spelled E-A-E, but pronounced Lee. I put the parentheses because most people mispronounce my name all the time, and for clarification, it is Lee like C-T-P, flea, etc. That, however, is not what this post is about. I posted before about a ghost named Wyatt who followed me to Washington from North Carolina. And yeah, he is still around, and no, I don't think he plans on leaving anytime soon. And no, I don't care that he's here. Wyatt is the first ghost I remember seeing. I was only 5 or 6 at that time. He helped me while I was lost in the woods near my uncle's old house. However, I'm sure that I've always seen and heard things before. I know that I do now. After Wyatt came into my life, my family and I moved to Oregon. There, I experienced a lot of things, and at the time I was 8 and the first place my family lived in was a small town called Vail. There I encountered several spirits. My most vivid memory is an old Victorian-style house that was avocado green. So you understand, this house had 2 floors and a basement. I hated that basement. Every time I would go down there, I felt like I was being watched. The worst of the activity would happen at night. I could hear chains being dragged up the basement stairs, then to the 2nd floor, where they would stop outside of my room. No, with the rooms in this house close together with a bathroom at the top of the stairs, and next to it was my mom and stepdad's room. Then my brother's and mine, and at the time I slept with the door open so I could go to the bathroom without worrying about opening my door. It was right across the landing from my room. Those nights where the chains would come upstairs, I would bury my head underneath my covers and wait till morning. Woke up at 6 then, Still do to this day, actually. But the chains would happen around midnight. I know, because I had a Garfield alarm clock that my grandmother had given me. The chains weren't the only thing that I experienced in that house. There was also a little girl in my closet, a homestead family that stood in the corner of my room, and some indigenous people who would kind of appear randomly. So I've explained about the houses and some of what I experienced there. Now, I'm not afraid of the dark, and never really have been despite what I've seen and heard. However, I was terrified of being alone in most of the house that I grew up in. The greenhouse was no exception. My brothers were in the band, that's sort of when we lived in the house. One played the drums, the other on the sax. They had a concert that had they had to participate in it or they would fail, only both my mom and stepdad worked until 8 o'clock back then. My brother's concert was at 7. Mom and her stepdad had gotten permission to leave work early to make sure the boys got to their concert on time. And unfortunately, our stepdad was a cook, and the person meant to cover the rest of his shift was late getting there. We only had one car. My brothers are not really known for their patience, so they left the house at around 6:30, leaving me alone in the house. I was only 9 at that time, and the house always creeped me out. We had 2 dogs at the time, but they were outside dogs. Mom called expecting my oldest brother, who's 4 years older than I am. Expected him to answer, and imagine her shock at hearing my voice. Now, my mom knows about the things that I experienced in that house and others. Still doesn't believe me, but she knows. She told me to just turn on the TV and I'd be fine until, they get there. And spoiler, I was not. I watched the clock wait for them to get home, and about 7:15 when the sound started. Some could be explained as an old house settling, others couldn't. A house settling does not sound like a little girl giggling from upstairs in my room, or chains rattling in the basement. At about 7:20, things got worse. As my mom had said, I turned on the TV and was waiting for them to get home. This was one of those old TVs where I had to get up and change the channel. I was not getting off that couch. Whoever was in the house with me was not okay watching MASH reruns. Yeah, I enjoyed watching MASH as a kid. That was because the channels changed. I had had enough. I ran out of the house and sat on the front steps. Me being me, I forgot to grab a coat, and luckily, a nice older couple was living next door. They came home while I was sitting there. I called my mom and told her that I'd be at their house. They sat me down in their living room with the cartoons and a popsicle. Needless to say, my brothers in so much trouble. Their explanation for leaving me alone was that they didn't want to have to babysit their little sister. Yeah, that never did go over well with the parents, as you can imagine. My brothers never left me home alone after that. And I will never leave you alone either. Anybody who's still awake or sleeping, sweet dreams.